Good morning. Welcome to a session on Marketplace and how we believe you can use Marketplace as a software resource in your projects. This was a late-breaking session that we added, and we appreciate the early morning on-time people that registered yesterday, and thank you for your dedication. My name is Dave McCann. I run the Marketplace business for AWS. Kevin Wilmot, my colleague here, one of our solution architects, and one of the breakfast humouring topics is we have a Scotsman and an Englishman up here. We're just wondering if we have an Irishman in the audience, and then I can start with a joke.
There we go.
Two Irishmen at the back, so I'm sure there's a joke we can break the morning with. So we're going to try and be very quick for you this morning. We know that we have the main session starting at 9:30. We've budgeted 45 minutes. I actually think we'll run through pretty quickly and give you plenty of time to transition over to the main tent session. So don't be anxious about being late to get into main tent. I want to talk about why AWS has been building out Marketplace and what the philosophy is and how we're thinking long term about the way that we believe the way you procure software is going to change. And we're in a very early stage of how we see that happening, and we want to give you some forward ideas on where we see it happening over time. And then today we're going to drill into a project that we put together which we believe is typical of a lot of the workloads that move to AWS, and we're actually going to go online into Marketplace and provision up a set of capabilities in a way that we see people doing on a regular basis. Let's talk first of all about what cloud is doing to software procurement at a generic level. So you're all AWS users, we believe. You're provisioning and putting up systems on AWS already. And clearly what AWS has done is we've taken a lot of the friction out of the procurement of compute, network, and storage, and up to the database layer, such that you can essentially identify and provision very, very quickly. The reality is, however, a lot of projects require a collection of software assets that have to be deployed on that resource. And as an indication of just how much software gets deployed on top of compute, network, and resource, the way you should think about this is that worldwide, in terms of computing, compute, network, and storage is about a $150 billion industry. The software that gets deployed on that compute resource is about 300 billion. So really, the software ratio to the compute capacity model is about a 6-to-1 ratio. So everybody in this room is probably picking multiple products. And historically, software has been around for a long time, and in a physical on-premise model, you have procurement cycles that involve a lot of contracting, a lot of negotiation, supplying of the software. It's not a quick, fast model. So there's a mismatch between the frictionless model that we've put in place for compute, network, and storage, and then the provision of the software that you may have. If you think of the server infrastructure that you replace when you move to AWS, the world's got about 35 to 40 million Intel servers. If you think of that as the dominant architecture out there, those servers are slowly moving into the cloud, and you actually all own software assets that you've licensed for an on-premise machine. And so as you think about moving a workload into AWS, you're likely having a library of software for which you have licenses, you have rights to use, and some of those licenses will give you the rights to move them into a cloud environment. Some licenses are written not to give you that freedom to move into a virtualized or a cloud environment. It really does depend on the vendor. But what's happening over time is that as you move more and more of your workloads into the infrastructure available on AWS, you're really refreshing your software library. And as you refresh your software library, the opportunity that we've been thinking about since 2010, and we switched on Marketplace, was how do we change the way that you then procure and consume the library of software that you're typically using? And at the velocity of workloads that are moving to cloud, if you listen to a guy called Matt Eastwood from IDC, who studies shift to cloud, Matt would say that at the current rate and velocity, by about 2018, 50% of all workloads will have moved into a cloud infrastructure, which really means that your software library that you may be contracting on a 3 or a 5-year license model is really shifting over to what we would call a consumption-based model. And so you should think that in your software library asset, you have a library of software, you have on-premise computing, you have cloud computing, and as you move your workload in, you're going to be retiring an older license model, and your thought process is going to be, what's my new license model for cloud? So the way we thought forward on this when we built out Marketplace, and we switched Marketplace on, interestingly, 3 years ago this month. So the Marketplace library of software, which really is a catalog from which you can search, find, and deploy. That library actually switched on 3 years ago with about 150 titles, Kevin. One of the reasons we're doing an update here is we're adding and expanding that library every day. So as of Monday, we are now up to 699 software companies. We're actually going to be later this morning announcing another 21 software companies in main stage who will be putting products into the catalog. So we'll be at 723 software companies who are putting products into that catalog. And as of this week, we're up to 2,100 titles. So now you can span across 23 categories of software. And this morning we'll be adding a set of software you'll hear later today, which will add another set of categories. And we've particularly procured and sourced those products based on the expectation and the shopping experience that we see. So we've taken some of the Amazon thinking on shopping experience, and we take that shop and fail as a guide for what we need to go procure. And then we have a set of managers who actually, under my group, who actually go and negotiate with the software companies. And so by the time you actually arrive and search in the Marketplace library, we've essentially procured and contracted with 700 companies. And we've negotiated with those 700 companies to stand behind our subscribe and agree contract. So we've essentially simplified the procurement model, and we're speeding up your ability to deploy. A question came up last night in the focus group, which is, do we actually curate these assets? So we guide the software company how to package. Kevin's one of our engineers who guides the ISVs on how they should package up an instance on a machine instance and what guidelines we give them. And then we scan and we monitor and we essentially curate that library of assets on an ongoing basis for things like vulnerability. So where we're at now is it gives you an ability to think about a project, possibly have a free trial. Each software company will decide the experience they want to give you. We've given them a framework, so some companies will come in and say, we're going to offer you a free trial. Some companies will say, we're going to give you an hourly model, we're going to give you a monthly model, and some companies are saying, we actually want you to license for a year. And so different software companies are taking a different approach. Our general framework is monthly, hourly, and annual as the first subscription models that we've introduced. And that gives you a choice of testing out a lot of software. What we also do is that the Marketplace team is actually part of the AWS platform organization. So I work in the same organization that owns our billing experience, and therefore we tie Marketplace through something that we call the subscription service. So we persist the subscription service, and we notice your subscription, we tag and we track the asset that you deploy, and now we've tagged and associated to your bill, and so now we've simplified the billing by tracking your subscription. And as long as you keep that subscription open, whether or not you're buying 1, 5, 10, or 15 products, you have an open running subscription established with the Marketplace engine that is tagged into the billing engine, and now we've paired your experience right into the bill. The other thing we're doing is scaling out, and so if you work for a global corporation, we were both in Frankfurt 3 weeks ago, where for German information compliance reasons, we've actually just stood the catalog up in our Frankfurt data center for reasons of compliance with German information law. So we also allow you to deploy and run those assets in particular regions. Now, if you think of the workloads that you bring, and Kevin and I have put together 4 in particular that we're going to cover in a minute, you know, there are 7 or 8 very clear workloads that AWS sees people bringing into AWS, right? So you have test dev as a classic workload, you have websites as a very typical workload. We've got large corporations like a Unilever who have moved 1,700 websites over onto AWS. So you have your test dev, you have your websites, you have brand new applications that you're building, and then you start to bring some of your classic enterprise applications, your Oracle databases. You've got companies that are now running their full SAP architecture in here, and we've got things like SAP HANA. So we've deliberately created 23 categories. We've organized and classified the catalog of 2,100 titles into 23 categories. We have a search index in there such that you can go look into the search by category. And recently, in a survey we just did in February of our US buyers, about 35% of a Marketplace buyer shows up with category in mind, and they've decided that they're coming in for a network management capability or they're coming in for a BI capability. Another 35% of our buyers are actually showing up with a very specific product because you have familiarity with a given tool, you know it, and you actually want to deploy that particular tool because it's going to be quick and easay. So you can either shop for a best in class, you can shop for a price, or you can go search very specifically for the vendor that you're used to using, but you actually want to have a new license deployable up on the AWS infrastructure. And that 23 category model has now been in place for about 2 years, and we're continually looking at whether we should be expanding category. So what we're going to do now that I've explained the framework of what we've got here is that we've essentially got at the top of the AWS stack an ability for you with your AWS account to now say, how do I source a set of software capabilities for a project that I have? So last week, Kevin and I sat down, or 2 weeks ago, we sat down and we said, what would be an example of a typical project we see our customers doing? And a common model that we see is big data and BI analysis of a project where you want to spin up a lot of resource and you're going to move a set of on-premise data. You want to do some very quick but fast analytics. You want to use some very good tools, and you're under a deadline. And this is a common use of the AWS infrastructure model. So you start with the idea that you're going to be coming in here and we're going to set up the database. Then we're actually going to look at how you might set up the network topology if you're in actual fact setting up a large number of users who want to access that data. We have drug companies like Philips who will load very large patient analytic data into the cloud and make it available to a bunch of data scientists. Then we'll get into security. So in our shared security model, we handle everything that is an AWS service. You're standing up your own data. You should secure that data. You've obviously got to look at threat management. And one of the top categories that gets deployed out of Marketplace is a threat management tool. And we afford you a whole library of the leading threat management vendors who have packaged up assets for you to use. And then we finish with which of the BI tools do you want to use? There's a set of BI tools in there right now. There's another set of BI vendors that we'll be announcing in New York in July. So there's a constant addition of new BI tools. And so now what we're going to do, if we can flip over here from the PowerPoint slides, please, we're going to cut over live. There's an interesting British TV show that Kevin and I both know called, hands up if anybody's British, maybe one in the audience. The reality is that there was a show in Britain on TV called Blue Peter where they would assemble products. And in the assembly of products, we don't want you to sit through every step. So we've pre-provisioned 2 steps, but we're going to show you 2 of the other steps in the model. Yeah. And that way we'll stay on schedule, Kevin. So handing over to the Englishman from the Scotsman, despite the fact that we lost the vote on independence, let's move over to what we've set up for you.
Thank you. Feels good to be in control still. Good. So so the first thing, as Dave talked about, we're going to look at how we get data into the AWS environment. So we, if you can just use your imagination for me a second, I've created a database sat in Redshift. It consisted of a bunch of data from a gaming company, and the data showed all kinds of user experience, gender information, downloads, all kinds of different content for from their on-prem data center. So the first thing I did was go into Marketplace, and I was looking for a tool to transfer the data from my on-prem to the cloud, and I chose Attunity. There are other products available there too, but Attunity is it was my tool of choice.
And we picked this tool just to show you this morning as an example. This was Philips Healthcare in New Jersey, had a project. The chief data scientist was looking for a way to quickly load and establish a new data set, and literally went out, looked at the best-in-class tools we had, and picked the Attunity project.
Exactly. And so you can deploy this. I'm just showing you the manual tab from the Marketplace, which can show you you would provision into a region of your choice. And there are some recommended security group settings there, but essentially all it is a accepting of terms of point and click, and the software will start and install. And when I did it, it took less than 4 minutes to install and provision the instance and get everything up and running, ready to move the data over. And the data moving itself, I put 4 million records into Redshift, and it took approximately 8 minutes to move that data over.
So when he clicks on that accept terms button, we've just taken all of the friction out of your contracting with Attunity. So there is no contract between your company and Attunity. You've contracted with AWS. We have actually handled all that back contracting with Attunity. So we've got this back-to-back relationship. So we've simplified the procurement. We've done all the packaging and guided their engineers. They've changed their license management model in order to work inside our consumption-based model. It's one of the key things the ISV does. And then we've cleaned up a very compressed OS instance of their choice and the application configuration for optimal performance in this deployment model. So we've done all of that early work. That's the service that our engineers do in the Marketplace operations group with Kevin and some of our other architects. So there's a packaging job that we've done for you, and we've eliminated all of the packaging effort, the configuration effort to be ready to go.
Great. Next step was securing the network infrastructure, and for that I chose F5's Big IP product. And obviously I've just done a small deployment for the purpose of the exercise, so there's not a ton of configuration stuff that I'm able to show you here, but suffice to say that this would be used in a large-scale deployment where you've got lots of application stacks that you're moving out to the web. You could do a traditional deployment model utilizing the VPCs within Marketplace, subnets and security groups, creating a model where you've got your management interface, your external interface, and then your internal subnet where you're running software first before you're letting it out into the big bad world. So I used F5 for that. Again, took minutes to provision and was up and running in no time. And that you can see in the console here, I have my demo Big IP configuration already there and running. So that's the first two steps. So we've loaded the data, and we've secured the infrastructure. Next, we're going to jump over to security. As part of this demo, I was thinking about how we can show security in an interesting and clever way. And so, as part of this, standing up a web server is a common function that you yourselves are using every day. You're maybe putting data out to an internal set of resources, or you're putting data out into the internet for your customers to consume. And so, standing up a web server is a simple way of doing it and a practiced way of doing it. And so I stood up a web server and sat my WAF in front of that, and I switched it on. And I'm using Fortinet's FortiWeb product, and I just wanted you to see this because I turned it on for a few minutes, and I think it just really highlights the power and the greatness of what we're doing here is that you can deploy and configure this in less than 10 minutes. And I switched it on, sat it in front of my Port 80 web server, and here's a bunch of bots that already came along and started hitting my web server. I got a bunch from the States. If I scroll down, you'll see I got some from, there's Taiwan, and then right down at the bottom, interestingly enough, I got a hit from China.
And that's in a handful of minutes. And one of the key things that gets deployed out of Marketplace is some kind of unified threat management engine. We've got a set of vendors that have packaged up their capability there. And every major project that goes through Marketplace, we see a lot of adoption of a threat management tool. Web application firewall is one example, or one subset of that library capability.
Right. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to show you a quick video that I shot of myself actually installing this, and this was sort of real time of installing this the actual application from Fortinet, and this is just going to run through, but it shows me provisioning the software. It shows me taking the instance type, configuring my VPC and my subnets. I'm going to provision and delete on termination because that's what I like to do. I'm going to add a name in there, and I'm going to secure my security groups, add my security groups, and then I'm going to pick my key pair and I'm going to deploy it. This actually is a video that runs in less than 2 minutes. It took me 4 minutes to do this in real time. So It's very quick and easy, and now you see everything is running. If I go to your services section of the marketplace, you can see there my second running instance there that I'm subscribed to for this Fortinet product. So very easy to do. Thing that took weeks and days and weeks before is easily provisioned within the marketplace.
And it's interesting here that if you think about a lot of your on-premise computing, your threat management firewall vendors are all historically appliance vendors, where they've pre-provisioned their software to you, very often in a hardware appliance, and you receive the hardware appliance and you configure it in your own data center or in your colo. And what's really happening with all the threat management security firewall vendors is they're detaching from hardware. They're really becoming a software package. It's security, it's threat management as a service. And then that package has been optimized for execution in the AWS fabric. And then we've again worked with them on the packaging licensing model and the contracting experience. And all of that has been done for you in the Marketplace library. So again, we're taking all the friction, you can go search, you can select, and then you have a choice set that you can configure and link into the topology of what you're building out.
Yep.
So we've now done 3 steps, right? So we've stepped up our RDS capabilities. We went and picked a Tunity for the data loading. We've moved the data in. We did the F5, the load balancer. Now Kevin moves on to the visualization phase of your project,
Right.
phase 4.
Okay. So for this, I'm using Jaspersoft's product. There again, with all of these, there are many alternatives to be found in the marketplace, and I just happened to choose Tibco Jaspersoft because that's the one I wanted to use. It's a very popular choice in the marketplace, but there are equally others available for you to take a look at. And so I canned a couple of reports. I'm still using my real data. Remember, this is all happening in my Redshift cluster on the back end live. It's running now inside of AWS. And just in case you don't believe me, here's a window of my SQL client here. And if you look down there, I could just table it for you right now. Well, I've already done it. Live demos, man, I tell you. Never mind. In any case, there's 4 million records in that Redshift cluster, and now this report is querying off to that Redshift cluster, and it's pulling back on the left-hand side. On the vertical axis, you see revenue, and on the bottom, you see by age, and the stacked chart here shows in blue male purchases, and in the darker color is our female purchases. And that was data that was just tabled from a query I constructed in Jaspersoft, and tabling right against that data in Redshift, and it's back into my interface here, and got the information that I require. I go back here, back to my reports. Also an interesting one is the daily visitor report. So the company was tabling lots of data, and they didn't have this available to them before, but using Jaspersoft and their data set in the back end in Redshift, this is a graph that's easily created, again through, I think it was 3 drag and drops of fields into their interface, execute the query. This ran live, again against my database, which is running in the West region, and there are your results. So you can see it's easy. I procured a BYOL license for this for Jaspersoft. I installed it directly onto this machine, and it took me just a few minutes to do that. There was almost no configuration whatsoever. It took the 15 minutes to get my data into Redshift using a Tunity, and I was able to create these queries in minutes, and I'm logging data and showing reports. And you can do a whole lot more than I'm able to show you today, but these are very powerful tools, and there are many of them available through the marketplace.
So if we can toggle back to the PowerPoint slide, please. So if you think of what we did very quickly here, and we're 25 minutes in, the way we think you're going to evolve your thinking on projects as you face a project in your business is there's a planning phase of deciding what infrastructure you're going to stand up. There's a topology of what architecture you want to have for an application that's going to be long running, or if it's a short running project. So clearly you're going to go through some topology and framework and architecture discussion, as we did a couple of weeks ago, and said, what's the set of tools that we want to solve the problem with? Clearly, the first thing we did is we made a choice to use RDS as a service. We went up there and we used a Redshift capability, and so we stood up our database there and put in that first layer. Then you go into this mindset of, where is my software for the project? And in the past, that might have been where it was hard, or you were limited on what you could use in your project with what you already had as a company. And the difference now is, at a project level, you've got the ability basically to go to Marketplace as your library and think about, what new tool might I want to use that will save me time, or will save me cost, or I'm familiar with. And particularly, the more vendors we put into the Marketplace experience with which you are familiar of your on-premise experience, the shorter the project curve time is for you in terms of what you're doing. So clearly, you select, you buy, and now you do your network tool. You go back to Marketplace, you repeat, you do a selection, you pick your WAF tool, or you have your WAF tool of choice. Kevin mentioned you can bring your own license. Most of the software vendors have set up a choice in Marketplace. Not all vendors have, but a lot of them have actually put an ability for you to enter in a license key if you've already got a license for the existing product, so you can use it and deploy. Or you can go to procure a new version on some period basis that you think appropriate to your project. You get those configured, and literally it's a very fast project methodology. And so as we expand the library up to 2,100 projects or software products on 23 categories, and more products coming online, we believe what we're doing is every week we're expanding your choice set for how to approach a new project. And total time over the weekend that you took to set this up?
Right, so it took longer in planning, in deciding what we were going to pull together for this, in terms of the data set and putting it, loading it and just figuring out the components. But in all told, it took less than 1 hour to find the product in Marketplace, provision the instance, and configure it and connect it together. It took less than an hour to do that. So, that's just incredible time saving, enables you to, just get on as developers to, actually start project work and not having to worry about infrastructure stuff that ordinarily would take weeks or months to procure and get in place.
So that really is the synopsis of the case. I mean, essentially what we believe we're now doing is that we're giving you the ability to design a project, accelerate your procurement, and do your deployment in handfuls of hours. And so really take the friction out of the upper layer of your experience, not on the compute network and storage, but on all the software that you would then run and secure that project as you go forward. We think this is the future of how you procure your software, and more software companies are packaging up, publishing in Marketplace. I met with a software company yesterday here in San Francisco, moving 6 more products into Marketplace. And so what we're seeing is a cohort of buyers. I'll finish with an interesting thought for you. When we switched on Marketplace in 2013, 2012, we're now 3 years, 2012, year 1, we had a lot of people experimenting. They would browse and look and experiment. Year 2, we had people coming in and they were buying 1 or 2 projects and running them for months. Year 3, a lot of the software companies cottoned on to what we were seeing. We report back some of the patterns of consumption. Last year, we were asked to introduce annual licensing. About 160 software companies lent in straight away and published an annual license. And now what's happening is that the software companies are moving more and more of their product portfolio. The opportunity for your software supplier is, this is a quicker way for them to make them available to you, because as they publish into Marketplace, it's instantly available for you to deploy. And it really becomes digital distribution. So it's digital distribution, it's digital deployment, and there's, the CD has gone, and it's there, and you use it, and the duration is what you want to use for your project. We think that's the future of what happens to software over time. And as you move from 5% of your workloads into AWS to 100% of your workloads in AWS, then your software library is your 5-year in perpetuity license is going to, your library of licenses under that model is just going to deprecate, and your licenses that you're going to have are only going to be the licenses you need. So you're also going to get away from something that some large companies that we've talked to, one of our customer advisory board members said, we have 9,000 titles in our company across 40 divisions, and we think 35% of it is sitting on the shelf. And what this does is it eliminates you spending money on shelfware, because you're only going to use those assets that you need for particular projects. And so you're going to refresh your software library from 5-year subscription, 35% shelfware, over to a narrower set, which is constantly updated by the vendors,
Right.
so that we have latest versions.
Right. That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
We
Thank
did it
you.
on time. We'll let you get back to the main tent. Thank you for coming and give us your attention, and we'll be here if you want to come up and ask a couple of questions. Thank you.
Thanks.